now. Today we'll be discussing how to improve your ITSM metrics with Marcellus Elfrey, our pre-sales consultant. Just to inform you, delegate audio will be muted during the presentation to help facilitate flow and timekeeping. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type it into the GoToMeeting question facility on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll collect questions and answer them at the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for taking time to attend, and I will now pass you over to Marcellus.
Hi, thank you everybody for attending this webinar. As you've been told, my name is Marcellus Elfrey. I've been a pre-sales consultant here at Hornbill for a number of years. So I'll be talking to you today about improving your ITSM metrics. So the sort of things we'll be looking at is we're going to spend some time looking at metrics in everyday life. Then we're going to talk about some tips about how to improve your ITSM metrics. Then we're going to go and look at Supportworks, the sort of matrices that you can actually create within Supportworks. So we can look at reporting, we look at dashboards, and then we'll spend some time looking at Supportworks Execview, which gives you a higher level of scorecard metrics. And finally, we'll conclude looking at some top tips from Patrick Bolger, who is our Chief Evangelist here at Hornbill. And then we can answer some questions from yourselves. Okay? So looking at metrics in everyday life. So every day we actually use metrics all the time. Whether you're aware of it or not, we're constantly asking questions about how big something is. If anybody asks us to lift something, we're constantly asking how heavy this is. We ask what time it is, what's the cost of things. So we're constantly using matrices and measurements throughout. Okay? Sometimes the measurements appear a bit vague in statements such as soon. So when somebody asks us what time we're going to arrive, we'd say soon rather than giving them a precise time, like, for example, 10 minutes. Okay? So as we go through life, we're using matrices, we're using measurements. We may be aware of it or you may not be aware of it, but metrics is a major part of our everyday life. One area in particular where metrics are extremely important is in sports. So you looked at, for example, in the javelin, you have to see, well, how far can we throw? We need to throw further than the next man. We have to hold the javelin at a certain angle, otherwise we might end up taking half our face off, which we don't actually want. So we have to be very precise in how we hold the javelin and how we throw that javelin. So this is again another form of measurements being used there. Looking at the high jump, again, the steps, the running, the setup has to be precise in order to get over that bar. Looking at down the bottom right hand side of my screen here, you can see the Russian rhythmic gymnast, where at the London 2012 Olympics almost lost the gold with that particular performance, where they actually, the judges, so here you have matrices where the judges are judging those gymnasts here, looking at their the synchronization between the teams. So here the judges are actually deducting some points from them, where the Belarus and the Italian team could have won, but eventually they won the gold, so good for them. We look at where matrices, sometimes we need more than one metrics to actually determine and tell us the whole story to make a decision on. So look at the top left-hand side here. In one particular area where this is very, very prominent is in the Olympics trials for the US, where two athletes, Alison Phoenix and Janeba Tamo, actually finished at exactly the same time. So the system, the current metrics used to measure the times couldn't actually determine a winner. So there we had a separate metrics needed to be used. So what they did was they decided that they were going to actually decide the winner on a toss of a coin. Okay, so that's another form of metrics. So sometimes the matrices that we use don't give us the full story, so we now need to actually collect those matrices together. And in ITSM terms, we'll probably talk about multi-series matrices to give us the full story, to give us the full picture of that metrics. Okay. Matrices are not just used in sports. In our everyday life, we use metrics. As from the day we were born, we use metrics. So constantly, if I said to you, well, the baby was born and the baby weighed 2 pounds, you might think this is a premature baby. So we use metrics to actually make assumptions based on those matrices. So if I said the baby was 7 pounds, you might say, well, that's a healthy baby. Again, another assumption there. Could be something wrong. If I say baby was 15 pounds, that might, again, you might have some concerns for the mom. you might start thinking, well, that's a bit big. But then again, it could have been the baby was born by a different method. Okay? So as we go through our life, matrices are being used all the time. As we're growing up, we talk about what school we're going to go to, what school we're going to send our kids, what criteria it used to measure the entrance to that particular school. Is it 11 plus? Do they have to sit an exam? Is it the catchment? So there's lots of measurements being used throughout our adult life as we're going through. We even talk about how sleep affect our kids. All the way to the end, when we finally depart this world, we still use measurements. So we're still being measured finally to see how big the coffin needs to be or how wide the casket needs to be. And so throughout, there's no escaping matrices, so we're constantly using it. On our way to work, on our way to the shop, we use the gauge in our car to tell us, well, are we running out of petrol, to tell us how fast we're driving. So that keeps us in line so we don't break the speed limit and don't get any speeding ticket. God knows I should keep my eyes more on my speedometer. I've had a few of these speeding tickets. So there's a case of ignoring the metrics presented to me here. So metrics are important in our life. Okay? Now bring that in line with ITSM itself. So we can see here that screen I'm just showing you here where we have 348 KPIs and 116 CSF just from the two ITIL books on service operation and service transition. Okay, so we're looking at the critical success factor and we're looking at the key performance indicators. So even ITIL is telling us there are lots and lots and lots of measurements, lots of matrices that we need to actually capture to help us not just to determine how many calls we log, but to help us improve the service that we deliver to our end users. Okay, so as you can see, if anybody wants any of those ITIL books, I could probably send you a link to where you can find those books. I'm sure you probably have those already. But you can see that there's a number of, in ITIL service operation is talking about measurements for incident management, request fulfillment, so how many services you fulfill, how many incidents have been logged against how many has been resolved. So there's lots and lots of matrices that we need to measure and keep a hold of as we go through. Okay. Now, let's talk about some ways that we can improve the matrices that we use. So one of the first things that we really truly need to ask ourselves is, why are you measuring what you are measuring? Okay. What is it? Does it tell a story? What is the purpose of that particular metrics or the matrices that you measure? Patrick Bolger and Malcolm Fry, an ITSM consultant, talks about some key issues that you need to consider when you start to design your metrics. So some of the things you need to consider is who will receive the information. Okay. Now you might have a business unit manager who says, well, I'm interested in the number of services that are being requested by my customers. I'm interested in the service availability, the downtime of that particular service. I'm not really interested in, and they may not be interested in the number of incidents logged by the team. So you need to consider, well, who will receive that information that you're going to produce within that metrics. See? Then what will they do with that particular metrics? Okay? So within that metrics, you look at, well, what decision and what action will be taken based on that particular metrics itself. Think about how difficult or how easy it is to actually collect that information, collect the data that's required to produce the information within your metrics. So there's no point trying to create matrices if you don't have the actual data that will help you with that. Okay? And sometimes it's quite difficult to capture that data, so you may need to use one or more tools to do so. Okay? Does your metrics tell a story? What does it tell the person? So the people that you're going to be sending those reports to, those dashboards to, those KPIs to, what story does it tell them? What decision does it help them to make? So you need to consider the purpose of that particular metrics that you're sending out to your users. Okay? In some cases, you also need to say, well, what does it not tell them? Okay? Does the fact that I have a metric that shows me the number of incidents logged per month, does that give me enough information to tell me that either I need to send my staff for more training, or either I don't have the resources, or do I need to have another metrics to that says, well, the number of incidents resolved per month? So now I have a metric that shows me the number of incidents logged per month and the number of incidents resolved per month. Here I can do some comparisons. I can say perhaps we might need some more training, perhaps we need to employ some more people. We don't have enough resources to do that. One critical thing that you should consider then is engaging the stakeholders themselves in helping you to produce those matrices. Okay? Getting the answers to the questions above from those stakeholders. Okay? So you ask yourself this question: all those metrics that you're sending out to all those stakeholders, how many of those people come back to you and say, well, that metric you sent me, that report you sent me has helped me make a decision. It's helped me, it's provoked a discussion here that I need to get together with you to discuss certain issues. So think about this when you're producing those metrics. Get your stakeholders involved, and then your matrices will be detailed enough and will be more specific to these stakeholders. Okay? I was reading an article the other day written by Randy Stanberg from Migration Technologies, and he came up with some ideas about how you can improve your matrices, and I thought I'd include this in here. So what Randy is saying, that you follow through the 7-step improvement process that ITIL has stated in their ITIL book. So you follow things like, you ask, well, what should you measure? So the idea here is you should get the strategic and operational views of the company should feed into that particular questionnaire to help you produce the right measurements. So you can look at what can be measured. So what can IT and the business actively measure that will be of benefit to the organization itself? Okay? Then you look at gathering the data itself, the measure itself. So you're looking at, so this will help the organization hopefully to reach its goals. So your matrices should not just be just about the service desk. You should look at the whole of the organization itself. And he talks about processing the data. So determining the correct style of the data, the correct format, so make it presentable. And he talks about analyzing the data, not just putting in just a series of graphs in there, but then talk about trends and discrepancies within the data itself. Associate some explanations and prepare for some discussion. So what you're trying to do there is provoke some discussion with the stakeholders around those measures and KPIs and what they mean. Okay? And then he goes on to talk about implementing some corrective action here. Okay? So you document the improvements. You talk about have a service improvement program, create a new baseline, and start the 7 steps again if you need to then repeat and improve your matrices more and more. Yeah? Then goes further to talk about, well, identify what needs to be measured first. So this goes back to some of the tips that was on the previous slide. What exactly is it that you're measuring? Okay? So have that question in the forefront of your mind. So what is it now measuring? What is the purpose of that measurement? Then talks about identifying a strategy for getting those matrices. Okay? Further talking about develop an actual metrics dictionary itself. Okay? Describe your measurements, describe your standards. So have a template that describes what the matrices are, the data source, where you're actually going to collect the data, where is it coming from, the actual calculations that's going to be used within those metrics. Look at thresholds for action. So if it goes above, so if we're looking at measuring number of calls and we have a threshold of, say, the number of calls we want to log per month is 600, have a threshold for that. That might send a notification to someone, send a warning, an alert to someone to say we log in a bit more calls than that. Okay. Determine the intended audience for each of your matrices. So within your actual metrics dictionary, you have a list of all these things. Each metric you have within that is you've got the audience it's intended for as well. Further, something that Randy talks about that I quite agree with is that think about implementing reporting as an IT service itself. So stakeholders can come to you and request those services. Okay? So there are some very good tips to think about before you start actually implementing your metrics, and I'm sure some of you probably have those kind of guidelines and have those in place, but there's some quite useful tips on there from Randy and from Patrick and Malcolm on here. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into Supportworks, and then we're going to look around Supportworks look at some of the matrices that you can produce in Supportworks itself. Okay, let me get into Supportworks. So one of the first things that happens when you log into Supportworks is you get a landing page. So you get the Supportworks Today page. Now I know a lot of people, probably a lot of organizations probably don't really make use of that page, but this is a very basic and quite informative set of matrices that you can publish to your analysts specifically. So we're looking at the operational level here first and foremost. So it's got to start the operational level. We're saying first, when people log into Supportworks, we give them a number of matrices here. So we give them things like, as basic as they are, we give them information around the number of major incidents, the number of reported problems, the number of known errors, what's happening with our services. It's a quite informative to the analyst, because the analyst now, when they're talking to a customer, can then say to customers, well, we know certain issues exist, we are dealing with those issues, therefore you can reduce the number of calls that are being logged. Okay, so again, that's reducing your, if calls logged per month is something that's vital for you on an operational level, this is one way of helping to reduce that. You can then look at the number of activities that are happening in terms of your changes, the number of changes being implemented today, tomorrow, last week, this week, later in the week, and so on. So again, some very useful metrics here saying around your change management process, giving people information around what's happening. Going further down, looking at some real-time metrics here. So we're looking at some real-time service desk metrics. So at a glance, very quickly, a team leader or the service delivery manager can see exactly what's happening on the service desk. So we can see calls here that are about to miss targets, for example, like that, in terms of the SLAs, if that's important to you. In some organizations, you've got SLAs. Missing SLAs carries a penalty. So it's important that we produce metrics that shows us exactly when SLA is about to be breached and when they've been breached, so we can take some action against that. So we've got on this right-hand side here where we have an active metric showing us the number of calls that's been breached. In this example here, we've got 10. It shows us a number of calls breached in 5 days, the number of calls the number of calls currently at risk. So here we can start drilling down into these things and start taking some preventive actions to make sure these SLAs are not really breached. Okay. So very, very basic in terms of just straight logging into Supportworks. We've got some very good metrics straight off that you can have. They're operational, that you can produce and show your analysts themselves. Okay. Now, for those of you who knows, you can actually go into these matrices here and you can change them yourself. So if you do have the expertise in-house in terms of whoever has PHP skills and stuff, so you can actually change those basic matrices here and have them populate this area on here. Okay. Now, we talked earlier on in some of the slides I talked about is collecting the data that you need to produce your metrics. Okay. So one of the things you'll need to do is you'll need to make sure the data exists. So if you're going to use Supportworks to produce some of those reports, produce some of those metrics, you need to make sure the data exists. So if you're going to start measuring things like your service portfolio, so your service costing and pricing and service availability, you need to ensure that your day-to-day staff are actually collecting that information for you. Otherwise, you will not be able to produce those metrics. So if I just drill down into the email service here, for example, and incidentally, while we're talking about one very quick way of gathering this information automatically is having Supportworks integrated with any monitoring tools you may have out there, whether that be SolarWinds or any network monitoring tools in there. That is actually sending some events into Supportworks, sending triggers into Support, again metrics, sending some metrics into Supportworks, which can then be used to automatically populate the data that you'll need to actually produce some of the matrices that you need around your services. Okay, so we can then look at things like having the availability set up automatically from these monitoring tools. Okay, so you can have a complete history of that. Supportworks can then raise a call from that event. You can then notify an administrator. The administrator can then go out and fix that issue, and then another notification will be sent back into Supportworks. Again, you can then run reports and say, well, what was your availability? What was the downtime? When did it happen? And so on. Okay, so you get all this information automatically loaded into Supportworks itself through the availability of your services. Okay, so we need to capture the relevant information and services. So here Supportworks will help you some capacity management. So this is one of the KPI, one of the matrices that's talked about in the ITIL operation, service operation. So we can see Supportworks there has projected number of users, whether that's 500, 5,000 up to you, and it then will calculate depending on the number of users you subscribe to that service. So you can then run reports now and see things around the cost of the service, the number of users of that service itself. Important to have things like the business owner and IT owner, because that's important when you're going to talk about any discussions around things like downtime and availability. It's important to know who you need to go and talk to. So some of the information here is quite useful, gathering that on the service record itself. We then look at the cost element of that. So we look at the cost of each of the components that's going to make up that service and each of the subscription itself. And you can see each one of these have a unit cost in there as well. And if you want to include that in your calculations, you can do so as well. Okay. Next, we talked about whether you want to associate any of those costs with a contract, whether you want to associate that with an affected business area itself. And I'd probably suggest you do so, because then automatically you know who you need to have the discussion with if this is a critical system for that person. So again, that's helping you to determine who you need to go and have the discussion around those matrices with. Okay. So we're looking at just around the service here, where we're saying, well, in order for us to be able to produce measurements and metrics around our services, our service portfolio, we need to make sure we capture the relevant information in here. So that's just quickly taking you through that service record and making sure that you know, you have an idea where all this information is held. Now we're going to go and look at some of the reporting elements of Supportworks itself. And before I move on here, you can see on the left-hand side, very quickly, I'm showing the analysts as they log in. There's a good example of a metric showing them how many cores they currently have in their core queue without them even going and check for it. Okay. First, we're going to go and have a look at the management information reporting side of things. So Supportworks, as you know, is provided with a reporting engine. That reporting engine is split into two sections. We've got the system reports at the top, which has a number of reports based on your SDI, Service Desk Institute reports, based on some ITIL reports. And then we have some custom HTML reports down at the bottom here. So these reports are reports designed and built using PHP. So some of these reports will be reports that we've done for you as a customer. So we'll deliver that with the system. Or it may be reports that we think that the SDI said we should have, or ITIL said we should produce, and we'll produce these reports in here and make them available to everyone. Okay. So if we look at in here some of the reports that we provide you with around ITIL itself, if you look at some of the service catalogs, so remember I talked about we're looking at if we want to do costings and stuff around our services, we can run in here and run some of those reports in here. I don't have any data in this particular one because I want to go on the request fulfillment on that. So if I go on the service request and cost versus price, so I can see the number of subscriptions I've got with my service request, and I can see the cost against the price itself. If I want to see just my portfolio prices, I've got a report I've already created earlier on, so I'll just go into that rather than building that from scratch. So I'm going to my sample reports in here, go into my service catalog, and you can see my portfolio. So I've got reports based on cost. So you can see all these nice little reports here, which we can then either, if we're happy with that report and we need to submit that to our stakeholders, we can simply go in and right-click on that report and then schedule that report. Okay? So first we'll spend the time to make sure the report tells the story. So you've got to make sure that metrics you're going to send to your stakeholder it will be interested to the stakeholder themselves. The report actually tells a story. The report helps that stakeholder to make some decision, whatever that happens to be. So you tidy up the report and make sure, and once you've done that, then you don't really need to go into that anymore. You might say, well, I'll just schedule that because we need to send that off once a day, once a week, once a month. So Supportworks has a scheduler that allows you to actually schedule the report itself. So I come into here, and I can schedule that. I've got two options here. I don't want to send it as a zip file, which means they'll need to have a specific file to open that, but I want to send it as a MIM, which basically means all they need is the browser to be able to read that particular report itself or the metrics. Okay. Then we look at the delivery side of things. So we have the option here to deliver that either via email. So we send it via email all the time. They can open it up, click on it, and it will log them into that report, or we can place it on a network somewhere where they can view that report, or we can place it on an FTP site. Okay, so I'm just going to select the email, select the recipient here, just randomly select one, and then I can schedule that report now. In this occasion, I'm going to schedule that once every 3 months here, and I can tell it when to start. So I can say when to start on a Sunday, what date to actually start itself. So every Sunday, first Sunday of 3 months, it's going to send that report out. So that might be a quarterly report. Okay. Or if I just want to run that a couple of times, if I want to run that for 4 quarters or 5 quarters, I can put that number in here. If we happen to have different applications sitting on the same platform in Supportworks, then I can decide which application I want that report to run on. So I can put it in ITSM, or I can put it in facilities or HR. Okay, I'm going to leave it in ITSM. Apply that, okay that, and then you can see my report has now been scheduled. So I've got 2 scheduled reports here, and each of these reports are being sent at different times to different people. So I can configure the report how I want to, get those metrics sent out to the right person. Okay. Now, in order to help you with this, so what we've actually done is we've actually published the schema report itself. So you need to understand where the information is coming from. You need to understand which tables within Supportworks holds that particular information that you're looking for. So what we've done is under the help file in your system, you'll go and see Supportworks ITSM schema report, and that will show you the actual schema report itself. If you're comfortable with database schemas and you know all about entity relationship diagram, you can look at that big diagram here. If not, find the individual tables. You can get used to each of these tables in here. And in particular, you want to view this field. I'm highlighting it, the comments field, which will actually tell you what the specific fields, the data in the specific fields are held for. Okay. Now, sometimes you might say, well, okay, we've got the schema report, but we don't actually know which fields are held in what table. An easy way to determine that is to look at the form itself. So if you're looking at things around where you want to produce core records, you can look at an incident form. You can go into the design of the form, the configuration, go into the design of the form and highlight the field that you want, and it will tell you within the properties which table hold that particular field. So that's a quick way for you to know exactly which table hold the fields with the data that you're looking for. So make use of the ITSM schema and make use of the designer itself. Obviously, you don't want to open the designer up to everybody, because you want to make sure you control it and people cannot go in and change the fields on your forms and so on. Okay. Next area we're going to look at. So we've looked at basically creating operational reports here. These are simple matrices where we just say, oh, I want to see core log per day, I want to see service cost, I want to see changes log per day, and so on. So these are individual matrices that we've created using Supportworks reporting here. The next level to that is now saying, well, we can use those and look at the dashboard side of things, where we can now create multiple matrices together. So where we can bring this together, where it gives us a better story. It's more meaningful. So if you look at down the bottom right hand side where I'm moving my mouse, you can see here now I've got a scorecard, a dashboard showing me incidents log per month, okay, call it that, but also incidents resolved per month. So now I can do some comparison. Now this can help me make some decision here. I can see here from the top that we're saying if we log anything above 650 calls a month, then we're in the danger point. So hence the red bits in here. Okay, anything below 650 is fine with us. So we've got 623 and it's green. Now we're looking at the resolve side of things and say, well, we'd like to resolve above 100 calls. Anything below that, then we're not performing well. So we can make those kind of decisions and assumption about that. Now, what that tells us doesn't necessarily mean that our staff is not good. It could be that we've got a lot of people on holiday, we've got people off sick. It could be that we need training or we don't have the right resources to do that. But at least those metrics will give you, it has a story. It tells you I can look at the two things and I can make a decision, or I can go and talk to the right people about that. Okay. So Supportworks has the dashboard and trending engine here. Down the bottom left hand side, just to take you quickly through that. We did a webinar on this last week, so if you want a link to that webinar, we can also forward you that link as well. So I'm not going to talk you through creating any of these, but I'll just quickly highlight the kind of things you can do in here. So we're looking at, first of all, we've got to create the measures that we want, so individual metrics. So we come in and we create those individual metrics in here, whether those metrics are whatever it is, whether it's based on the number of calls that's been resolved and missed the SLAs. We look at sampling that data, and then we're looking at where we're going to collect the data itself. Top bit saying we can collect the data from Supportworks. The bottom bit here means we can collect the data by creating our own PHP measures to actually go and provide us with that data itself. Okay. Once we've created those measures, we can then start looking at some of the widgets themselves. So we can look at some more specific widgets where we can create individual charts we can apply on a dashboard, or we can look at the scorecards. So here we can bring a number of measures. So all the measures we've just created, we can bring a number of them together to provide us with a dashboard or a scorecard that tells the true story, that gives us information about what's happening. So this is where we start looking at the kind of matrices we're going to provide to a service delivery manager, as opposed to the operational one we looked at with the reporting that just gave us simple information about how many calls logged, how many resolved, how many within SLA, how many outside SLAs, and so on. Okay, and then finally we can preview that to see what that particular metric is going to look like. Okay. Then once we've done that, we can then start creating some groups and some dashboards. So we can now say specifically here, now what we can do is we can say these are the people that we're actually going to give them access to this particular dashboard. So those particular metrics that are important to them, you can actually create some roles, create some groups, and allow them to access those metrics themselves. So you don't necessarily have to send them a report, physical report all the time. You can say, well, I'll give you that information live whenever you want to see, just access it. You can create your categories up here and then add in your dashboard to these categories. So you can see I've got service level management category up here, problem management, incident management, and change management. So I can then add in anybody, allow anybody to actually view those particular metrics that's relevant to them. Those metrics can also be published on a big screen in an option somewhere. Okay. So they're not just within Supportworks. They all you need is the URL, and you can publish it on a big screen in the office so everyone can see. Okay. So that's all about Supportworks itself. So Supportworks will help you produce operational reports. It will help you with some measurements and trending, so you can actually see what's happening over a period of time with the problems and incidents that are logged. Another element we have is what we called Supportworks Execview ITSM Scorecards. So we have a partnership with Execview, and we create some, it takes the basics of Supportworks day-to-day operational matrices and then roll that up to a higher level as you wish. Okay, so the Supportworks Execview actually leverages the ITIL data information and wisdom philosophy here that says, well, if you follow these things through, then you eventually end up with improving the matrices that you produced and so on. So you've got the Supportworks Execview Scorecard will help you. It's a cloud-based solution. Supportworks data is automatically populated into the Execview, and there's a lot of included KPIs from the ITIL 2011 in here. So Execview is based around governance and life cycle of excellence models and stuff like that. So it helps you to actually have matrices that you can form and base decisions around. Okay. So those scorecards will be relevant to each of your stakeholders. So you no longer have to provide irrelevant information to any of those stakeholders. So each of those scorecards you can produce exactly for each of your stakeholders, all the way from the operational level to the service delivery, all the way to your CIO and the boardroom. Okay. each of those scorecards as well allow you to drill down into the underlying data within those as well. Okay. So here is an overview of the Supportworks Execview. So you can see here, and within the Supportworks framework, Execview sits right within that. Okay. So the first thing we look at with the Execview, what it allows you to do, here is some of the operational reports, the operational matrices that we've just created within Supportworks. So you have your incident management, you have your problem management, you have your change management. So this is the operational day-to-day stuff that are useful to all your managers, all your analysts who want to see that. Then we have the next level above that. So we're looking at the service desk view itself. So your service delivery management, looking at the whole thing. It's looking at incidents, problems, changes, and looking at the overall impact, what risk are involved in each one of these. And then we can take that another level using that Supportworks Execview. So we can look at some CIO summary scorecards. So we can now go and talk to the IT director about other elements and possible actions that we're going to take against what's happening within our service desk. Okay. Now, Execview also have another element to it that it allows you to roll up your projects and portfolios into that report as well. Okay. Just to give you some quick highlights of that now. So if we look at the top part of this service delivery management scorecard that I'm looking at, so we're now being specific here, so just giving some details in there around what's happening, why, the purpose of that particular report itself. We're looking at here we've got a number of incidents volume per service, so we roll that, instead of just having individual matrices that just shows the individual services, we will now roll that into one. So we've got one report now with a multiple metrics showing us incidents per email, changes for made against the email server, and so on. We've got the performance summary down at the bottom, so we've got an idea of whether the green one means good, the yellow one means it's tolerable, and the bad one means bad. So we can measure, and we can see at a glance the performance of reducing those incidents, those requests, those changes, and so on. We can drill down into each one of these, and we can change the measures as we go through each one of these as well. So we can see that we have particular measure here measuring that SLA at 80%, but we can then go further and change that. So we can literally go into that. If, for example, we might say, okay, now we're performing above that, we now want to raise our target. We now want to raise the performance. We want to raise the bar at which people need to perform. So you can go in and change your SLA target to 80% or whatever number that's relevant to you, and then again that will just replicate through the rest of your scorecards, and you can start seeing now we can move that up to the CIO now, so that will help CIOs to make some more relevant decisions based on those scorecards themselves. Now there's lots of other information you can pull in. So within the Execview, Supportworks Execview, you can pull in information from your other projects. Now you can see where it's talking about the top 5 risks. So this is now giving the CIO information about where there are risks on particular projects, for example, and where training is required and so on. Okay. So together with Supportworks and Supportworks Execview, you should have enough there to actually help you provide high-level metrics. Now, some of you may not have Supportworks Execview, but you can probably do the same thing using Excel together with Supportworks, or indeed any other BI tool that you may have in-house to produce your metrics and so on. Okay. Finally, we're going to end up with looking at some of the top tips that Pat's talked about. So Pat's mentioned that your processes are good for ITSM. They're the good tools to help, but they're not. You've got to make sure you choose the right tool for the business. You've got to make sure any of those best practice tools that you're following, they're just an approach. Okay, so don't take them as definitive. Make sure you adopt them, you adapt them, and you improve them. So whichever one you decide you want to follow, whether it's the ITIL or whether it's SDI, make sure you follow the mantra of adopting what you want. Once you've adopted it, then adapt it so it fits your business. Determine why you need those metrics, who's going to receive it, what it is that you're going to measure, how you're going to measure, how you're going to collect the data itself, and what decisions they're going to support. Once you've gathered all that, make sure you then spend time improving those metrics as well. Okay, that's the end, guys. Thanks for listening. Now we're going to look at answering some questions, if there are any questions. So give me a minute to just read through some of the questions. Okay, we've got one question here. Now, some of these questions we're gonna respond to after this, because some of them are specific. So we'll probably respond to the people directly from here. But I'll try and answer some of the general ones. This was the summary report. Yes, you can get the summary reports. You can get the summary reports. Yes, those summary reports can be. You can change those summary reports. So there, again, I'll probably send that person a link on where to find those reports itself, because they're PHP reports, and you can actually go on and change those. So I'll show you how you change them. And then once you've done that, you can then add them within Supportworks itself. Oops, let's go. So you can get to add them within Supportworks by going through the file and manage settings and looking at the Supportworks Today settings on here, and then you can basically select what you want to appear on here. So you'll be able to select your summary reports. Once you select them, they'll appear on here. Okay. Next question here. Yeah, in the dashboards, if you upgrade your server, you should get the dashboards in, I think the dashboard and trending engine will come up in 7.6.1. So if you upgrade your server, you should actually get the dashboard. Let's see any other questions on here. Export to Excel, you'll only be able to do that if you run the report within Internet Explorer. So you go into settings. So what you need to do is go into tools here, go into options and settings, and go into settings and change the default so that when you run the reports, it will launch it in your web browser. And then from within the web browser, you can then right click and then do export to Excel. Okay. Within Supportworks itself, you cannot export those files to Excel. You can only export to XML, and then you can import that in MS Office or something like that. But if you go to tools and you change your settings to launch your report in a web browser, then that will give you the ability to export your report into Excel.
Okay, I don't think we have more time to answer the questions. However, we'll collect them and try to send all the answers individually. Thank you very much, Marcellus, for taking us through the ITSM metrics. I hope everyone found it useful. If you have any additional questions, please don't hesitate to contact your relationship manager here at Hornbill. Just to let you know, the record will be made available on the CAD forum later on today. Finally, thank you everyone for your time today, and once again, really sorry about technical problems to start with, and I hope you'll be joining us for Hornbill Academy next week. Thank you very much.